August 7th.
Yeah.
We're getting into it now. And to set the stage, because there's going to be a few things happening simultaneously, you have the big island, Guadalcanal, and right across what they call the slot, but it's this body of water that passes between the middle of the Solomon Islands.
Mm.
Right across the slot is going to be two much smaller islands. One is called Tulagi, which we've mentioned numerous times before. The other one is Gavutu Tanambogo. It's hyphenated. I'm just going to call it Gavutu from here on out because Tanambogo is a mouthful.
Good deal.
Now, the Raiders, and then another special unit at the time would have been the first Paramarine Battalion, or Parachute Battalion for the Marine Corps, are going to assault Gavutu and Tulagi. The Raiders are going to go to Tulagi. The Paramarines are going to take on Gavutu. And while the rest of the 1st Marine Division is going to assault the main island of Guadalcanal, I'm going to take us into those two smaller islands first because that's where most of the action happens, at least on this first day.
Yeah.
Now, Tulagi is about 4,000 yards long and no more than 1,000 yards wide. There's a high ridge that's going to run along the length of the island, except for one low open saddle near the southwest end. But then after that saddle, it rises back up to a hill. There are going to be roughly 900 Imperial Japanese forces on this island. Most of them are going to be focused to that southeast end of the island. So that saddle and then up on that last hill. Now, the only suitable landing beaches from a hydrographic standpoint are going to be on either side of that low ground. Not quite in the middle of the island, but almost in the middle of the island. There's going to be coral formations that fringe the rest of the island. Now, intelligence officers estimated that the island held several hundred men. Like we had mentioned before, there's around 900 of them. Some of them are going to be from the Japanese Special Naval Landing Force, which is their equivalent of Marines, and they're considered elite troops. Aerial reconnaissance indicated that they were dug in to defend the obvious landing sites. So, planers thus chose to make the assault halfway up the western coast at a place designated Blue Beach. Essentially what they did is they decided to have the first fight of this battle be against terrain and Mother Nature and not against enemy machine guns. Okay. And they chose wisely. Okay. So, on the morning of August 7th, this whole thing's going to kick off with a naval bombardment of the island. Edson's Raiders are going to load into Higgins boats. Even though they had trained on rubber boats, they're going to load into Higgins boats and take those as transport to the beach. Now, I mentioned before that coral rings this island and all the other places except that one saddle. So the last 100 yards of this approach, they actually have to disembark the Higgins boats and wade through the water. Very similar to like when I see videos of the assault on Tarawa.
Yeah.
Very much like that. The only difference is because of where they landed, they're not under machine gun fire, whereas the guys on Tarawa, unfortunately, are under heavy fire. Edson's 4 rifle companies are going to make it on shore. They're going to get online and then start sweeping on southeast towards that last hill on the island. Still in the morning, they're only going to receive sniper fire as they approach, just random sniper fire, nothing too intense, until they reach the end of that ridge line. They start coming down that ridge line into that saddle. They're going to halt there, and around noon, the Navy is going to begin bombardments again, and they're going to bombard that entire area for a while, and then that Edson's assault is going to pick up. And pretty much from that point on, Edson's Raiders are going to fight to gain control of that saddle from the entrenched Japanese. Now, it's important to point out that the 900 or so Japanese defenders on the island did radio like the primary Japanese force up at Rabaul, letting them know, hey, we're under an actual assault. There's a big conventional force here. It's not just a raid. And they decided they were going to fight to the death, which I saw this interview. Well, actually, you and I both listened to it with Eugene Sledge, who is, I mean, he doesn't even need an introduction, but I'll give him one just for the sake of giving him one. Yeah. He's what they based a good portion of the show The Pacific off of. he wrote a book called With the Old Breed. And in my opinion, it is the best firsthand account of warfare ever written. And there's some really good ones out there, but his is the most mind-blowing to me. And he made this point between, and he didn't do it. He said before he didn't mean any offense by this. He was just making a point that the German soldier, everything he heard about the Nazi German soldier, that they were outstanding soldiers, right? Yeah. They wanted to fight with honor. They wanted to do their duty, but then they wanted to go home at the end of the war. He said the difference between them and the Japanese is the Japanese wanted to fight with honor for their emperor, and then they wanted to die for their emperor.
That major difference.
So that means you have to kill every single one of them before you can take the island. Whereas, if that's different, if you have soldiers that are more in line with the Nazis, you can get them to surrender.
Yeah.
That's not the case in the Pacific Theater.
Definitely not.
So these guys have decided to fight to the death. The Marines are going to quickly discover that. The only way to take care of this is to kill them all. So they're going to employ explosives to take these Japanese soldiers out, occupying caves and bunkers throughout this saddle. As evening approached, the battalion is going to settle into a defensive line that is right on the cusp of that hill. So they haven't quite made it all the way up the next hill. They're just below the peak there. The Japanese are going to launch throughout the night. They're going to launch numerous bonsai attacks.
That's crazy.
And I think there's a total of 5 attacks. They begin at 10 p.m. at night, 2200, and it's actually the first one is going to punch a small hole in the Raiders' lines between 2 of their companies. It's so touch and go for a minute that Edson's headquarters tent is almost overran. Guys are getting into hand-to-hand combat. There's a few machine gun positions that get taken over by the Japanese, and then quickly the Raiders push them back out of it.
Dude, maybe I missed it, but I remember you saying 900 on the island of Japanese forces. How many Raiders are we talking about here?
I searched and searched and searched, and I could not find that number. But
if it's a battalion, I would guess 900 or less than 900.
I would say that they're very equivalent.
Okay.
I think the forces are fairly evenly matched. Now, in all fairness, one thing I haven't mentioned, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines are also going to be assisting on the island of Tulagi. The reason I haven't mentioned them, though, is because the Raiders are taking the brunt of the fighting. Yeah. When the Raiders land, they turn to the southeast and get online and push southeast. Okay. 2-5 is going to turn to the northwest and push that way, clearing out the rest of the island behind them, which there really wasn't any Japanese troops that direction.
Yeah.
So they're in the rear of the Raiders. So we do have a much larger force than the Japanese, but the ones that are actually in the fighting is just Edson's battalion. Okay. So it's fairly evenly matched numbers-wise. But that being said, for the night fighting, the Raiders are going to hold their ground. Now,
good.
This is also the first time that U.S. troops are going to be confronted with Japanese attempts to infiltrate the lines. They call it infiltration. Mm. Eugene Sledge talks about this numerous times.
Oh, yeah.
Japanese would try to low crawl or sneak in and get into a foxhole with you. And hearing him describe it, because we've been to combat, so I feel like I have a better ability of imagining some of these things. I've never heard anybody get into a hand-to-hand fight with somebody, right. But I can picture it, right? Like, yeah. I can, and I probably don't do it justice, but I feel like I can picture it better than I could have before I went to combat.
Sure.
But hearing him describe it, man, the noises that are made in the dark, because no one can come help you.
Yeah.
You get out of your hole, you might get shot by your own guys, which happens. It does. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens, right?
Because everybody's freaking out.
Yeah. But needless to say, this is the first time that they're going to encounter the Japanese infiltration attempts. In the morning, things are going to look very good for the Raiders. By 9 o'clock a.m., 2 companies of the 5th Marines will pass through the Raider lines and sweep over the southern portion of Hill 281, which is that last hill.
These are the reserve battalions?
Yep. So essentially, to kind of give you a mental picture here, you have the Raider battalion has moved down that saddle. They're right on the crest of the hill, and they start forming a ring around the Japanese. They've almost completely encircled them, but not quite. So the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines will come through, move through their line, and assault through. And essentially, I read that the Marines on Tulagi are going to kill all but 3 Japanese.
Wow.
Out of that roughly 900 man force.
Would the other 3 just kill themselves or run into the water?
I don't know if they took them prisoner. I just saw that statistic. I wasn't able to find out what exactly happened to them.
That's insane, dude.
But that's just a precursor of what's to come in the Pacific. I mean, it's that's some fighting, dude. Listen, it's one thing to have to like wound an enemy or to kill enough of them where they want to get out of the fight.
Yeah.
But to have to kill every single one, because one guy can do a lot of damage. Audie Murphy taught us that.
Yeah.
So
much.
And not only that, you have, which we'll get into later, but American medics and corpsmen, they're operating under the Geneva Convention. So anybody that's wounded, they have to treat, right?
Right.
A lot of the times, the Japanese they're not operating under that. It's Bushido code or something that they're operating under. The Japanese would, pop off grenades when the medics would come to help them.
Yeah.
All kind of crazy stuff.
You got to comb through everything because they're underground and they're in things and around things because it's tropical. It's like a jungle warfare where these guys are.
It's nightmarish. But needless to say, by 1500, 3 p.m. on the 8th, Edson declares the island secure. For the next few days, that doesn't mean the fighting is completely over. The next few days, Marines are going to go through the island bit by bit and fend off occasional infiltrations at night. But they're going to kill almost every single one of those Japanese soldiers on that island. For the Marine Corps, the entire battle, the Raiders suffered 38 dead and 55 wounded. There was an additional 33 casualties among other Marine units on the island. But again, all but 3 Japanese defenders are going to be killed on Tulagi.
Guys are doing work out there.
Now let's get over to Gavutu with the 1st Marine Parachute Battalion. They're going to go ashore at 1200 on August 7th with 397 men. So 12 p.m. They are, if you can, pull up a map or get on Google Maps and pull up the island of Gavutu, you'll see that Gavutu is the southeastern island, Tanambogo is the northwestern island, and they're attached by a skinny strip of land. The Marines will land on Gavutu, right where that skinny strip meets the island of Gavutu. What happens when they come ashore, they get caught in a crossfire from the Japanese that are on Gavutu and then by another Japanese element that's over on Tanambogo. They're caught in a crossfire and they get pinned down very quickly. The Paramarines are going to fight nonetheless. Eventually they'll make progress towards neutralizing the Japanese soldiers on Gavutu, but to really take the island, they're going to need help. So Marines from B Company, 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines, are going to make landfall on Tanambogo under the cover of darkness. That's the island to the northwest. And it's really unfortunate. So this same thing actually happened to the Japanese unit that was assaulting Wake Island. It just happens to us this time. But the Navy is going to bombard the island before this second landing takes place in the evening. And they're going to strike a fuel reserve that's going to explode and then catch on fire. And it illuminates the landing craft coming in.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So these guys are just torn to pieces. They're torn to pieces. Eventually, they are going to have to turn around, re-embark those landing craft, and make their way south down to Gavutu and land down there with the rest of the Paramarines. That being said, they're going to be sent more reinforcements to include tanks. And that's going to be a huge game changer. With those tanks, they were able to secure both islands, and just like that, by the 8th, both islands are secured, and it's on to the big island from there.
All the Japanese are dead.
We say that lightheartedly, but that's it's important to address this because this is another thing I heard Eugene Sledge talk about in that interview you and I just listened to. But he said our propaganda machine portrayed the Japanese as fanatical, and it's not really fair to portray them that way. It's a belief system. They believed their emperor was a god, and they have different cultural carrots and sticks than we do. But beyond all that, their military was brutal. There was no compassion in their military, especially in the beginning of the war. You know, you hear about commanders being able to beat their subordinates if they looked at them wrong, right?
Yeah.
Where, you know, things like that happen in the United States military, but that is severely, I mean, frowned upon, is to put it lightly, right? If a commander gets caught by a higher commander doing stuff like that, it can be a really bad day for them.
Oh yeah.
And they're operating by a different code of conduct. They're not operating under the Geneva Convention. They're operating by the Bushido Code, which is an entirely different belief system, right? And again, we had mentioned that their goal is to die for their emperor, not to live and make it home.
Yeah, they're not surrendering. So
right. So their approach to warfare is entirely different than ours, and to call them fanatical would just be kind of brushing a lot of that aside. They are a very brave, tenacious enemy, and you'll hear anybody that fought them say that. But yeah, we did. We had to take those islands, they had to kill just about all of them.
Yeah,
and that is so hard. I don't, you know, if you haven't been in combat, there's no way I can relate it to you besides saying that is so hard to do, to kill every single guy. You might get, like, you know, if you're fighting, let's put it down to a smaller size, squad on squad. Let's say a 12-man squad is fighting another 12-man size element. You might be able to kill 6 or 7 of them, or maybe even more than that. But to get every single one is so difficult, you know? Even fighting the Taliban will withdraw. If you killed enough of them, they're getting out of there. You don't even have to kill that many of them, and they're getting out of there. You know what I mean? But to have guys that are just, they're there. You're going to have to come and take my life to get me out of this island. That is hard to do.
Yeah.
And it's hard to take someone's life that is fighting for it, you know?
True. And this is not, I wouldn't say the beginning, but we are, you know, at this point in the war, very involved in a total war. It's a world war. There is, you know, of course, there's things like you said. There's rules and regulations, limitations in certain cases. But if that's what it requires, then that's what these guys are being thrust into do, and they have to do it. No other option.
Needless to say, man, I'm so thankful to that generation for doing that, fighting for us. But as someone that has been to combat, I feel so fortunate that my combat was not like that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's like you showed me that meme earlier of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans watching footage of Ukraine and going, you know, thinking, oh my God, thank God they didn't have that in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Drone attacks.
There are levels to combat.
Yeah.
And this kind of fighting here is something the world has only ever seen once on this scale. And it's insane. It's the epitome of what I would imagine hell to be like.
Yep. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this clip from America Fog of War, catch the rest of the episode here.